Just about a week through free agency, and now we discuss who are the biggest threats to the Florida Panthers in the Eastern Conference.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, July 7th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez. You can follow me out on Twitter and Threads, a new app that is somewhat competing with Twitter. Powered by Instagram and Facebook. You can follow me on both those platforms at MondoMan12. You could also follow me the show account on Twitter and Threads as well at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, this is a little bit of a fun exercise. Of course, you hear me talk all about the Florida Panthers and various guests as well on how they've improved, whether they haven't, and all. But now with free agency and the fact that the Florida Panthers were not the team that had the most money, they were around the middle of the pack, maybe in the bottom third of the NHL, which means other teams had money to play with and really went for it this offseason. And it's going to be a little difficult for the Florida Panthers to defend their Eastern Conference championship come next year. But it is Friday, which means it is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick Fairbanks is back. And Nick, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It seems like the last time we talked, a new social type of media came out, and that's big news. So can't wait to get this started, share it everywhere, and hopefully we can get some likes and some shares.
I think the breaking point was the day of free agency where it was the 600 tweets. What a time for that to happen. And it was just a frustrating day all around, especially when, you're refreshing, want to know the news right away. And also for me as well, for the national writers, I was subscribed to a tweet. So even when I wasn't on the app, it would buzz on my phone automatically. And I would be like, first to know. So that's a cool setting that, and you guys, if you follow me on Twitter, on at least the show account, you could subscribe to the tweets at LO_FLA Panthers. So when I tweet something from that account, you guys will get it straight to your phone if you want to find out something, or if I retweet something as well. Maybe Threads will come out with something too in that regard. But a few things before we get along with the main topic of today's show, which we're going to be talking about biggest threats to the Florida Panthers defending their Eastern Conference championship. Mike Reilly, defenseman Mike Reilly, who got bought out by the Boston Bruins, did speak to the media today via Zoom from his car. Did speak about how the group of guys in South Florida, he heard great things about even before they signed there. Spoke about how Barkov and Kachuk were the first people to reach out to him, and spoke a lot about the clubhouse culture. So hoping, Nick, that Mike Reilly is someone who could definitely become a mainstay in South Florida. As you know, we spoke about all of last week. He's only played 10 games last year for the Boston Bruins, going back to Providence quite a few times there. And it again, just like Jacob and I mentioned, even in the last episode with the injuries of Montour and Ekblad, it's a great opportunity for him to get some big minutes coming up this year.
Definitely, and it just seems like Bill Zito right out the gate, wanted to make sure that the team was going to have the parts that they needed going into last season. They waited to sign Eric Stahl until into the season, and he ended up being, the 4C And we know how that ended up. It actually turned out to be a pretty good move. But one of the things that the Panthers lacked last season overall was just depth. You would be calling people up from Grand Rapids instead of having somebody who's had NHL experience and being able to keep the team afloat. It almost cost them a playoff spot. They only got in the playoffs by 1 point. But Mike Reilly, I think, will flourish here. I think in Boston, uh, they had a couple of people that were just their mainstays, and I don't think that there's a lot of room left. And I think it's a no risk signing. If he doesn't work out, then he's free to go by the end of the season. But I just think that Zito wanted to make sure that they have the amount of people on the blue line to make sure that we get it through at least December, possibly January.
No doubt, and definitely, and even if he isn't a mainstay for the Panthers, it's definitely when those reinforcements do come back, maybe he could be valuable on another team. If he happens to go on waivers somewhat later, early on into the season, into the first third of the year. Even though we did speak about this last week, Patrick Hornquist did officially make it official that he has retired from the NHL. If you guys want to listen to me and Nick's episode from last week where we discuss even more in depth into that, now Patrick Hornquist officially makes it official. So let's go on to we're going to be spending most of this episode just talking about threats for the Florida Panthers, and of course, free agency has come and gone. Of course, there's different waves of free agency, and there's still many different dominoes to fall. Whether there's trades, whether there's signings as well. Two signings that have yet to happen. Vladimir Tarasenko, who was reported to go to the Carolina Hurricanes, still hasn't signed yet. Patrick Kane, who's waiting, probably going to be waiting a few months before he signs based on his surgery. And of course, there's possible trades of Alex DeBrincat and an Erik Karlsson there too. So, but we're just going based on what we know right now, based on 6:53 p.m. on a Thursday night. And as we end this segment, I want to name three bottom of the barrel teams who we don't see as a threat at all. And the three teams that I have named right here are the Columbus Blue Jackets, Montreal Canadiens, and the Philadelphia Flyers. The Blue Jackets had the most man games lost last year, but there's a lot of turnover as far as their blue line of David Severson they got from New Jersey, Ivan Provorov they got in a trade from Philadelphia. They did draft Adam Fantilli, who's another Michigan man, along with Kent Johnson there, but also a new coach in Mike Babcock, which not a big fan of his character on how he's done in the past as well, based on his stay in Toronto. But that's still a team that I think is still going to have a hard time making the postseason next this coming season. Montreal, they brought a good part of their team back, Alex Newhook, but brought in Alex Newhook as far as that trade. They used the asset that Florida got. And Cole Caulfield, man, that guy can be a 40-goal scorer in a healthy season as well. Traded Joel Edmondson to the Washington Capitals as part, but I'm not a big fan of their blue line. Their top pair, Mike Matheson and David Savard. That not one that you fear there. And Philadelphia, they're finally doing what Philadelphia fans have been asking for a while. Finally hitting the reset button, because in a big market like Philadelphia, it's and a rich history as far as the sport. They're finally hitting the reset button with Danny Briere as the GM, Keith Jones as part of the organization. Kevin Hayes got traded to the St. Louis Blues. We mentioned Ivan Provorov earlier as well, but Tony DeAngelo is reportedly going to be traded to the Carolina Hurricanes, but it can't be official until July 9th, based on a trade happening from over a year ago. And of course, Carolina trying to get him at a lower cap number as well. But is there any team that you want to add as far as bottom of the barrel, or are these three teams that you are certain of that won't be a threat?
In the East, definitely they'll be the least threatening. I always want to say Boston's going to fall off the cliff, but I don't think that they're going to be quite in this category. So, no, I actually don't have any other teams that I want to add. All the ideas and all the speculation that you put out there, how things could still move around, I think is on point. And, Columbus is in for a rough season. I think they got to, basically get over the hump, and they're going to see what they have in Fantilli. We'll see how Babcock has learned, if he's learned any kind of lesson. And Philadelphia, going to be terrible and going to get worse, it sounds like, just because they're getting rid of some of their top players, and I'll put that in air quotes. And then, I actually, you know what? I will add a team, Washington Capitals.
Oh, okay.
Um, I know that they still have Ovechkin, they have Oshie, they have a couple of gamers on there. It's just that's another team that's just been holding on and just doing whatever they can to either make the playoffs or just make sure that Ovechkin gets the record. But I don't see them really being a huge factor in the East.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that team is one that is kind of held on with duct tape, especially now that Evgeny Kuznetsov has been disgruntled for a while, and we don't know what's going to happen with him as well. They brought in Max Pacioretty as well to the mix, brought back Ferravari after they traded him. We don't know. And John Carlson's also getting a little older, but we saw how that team fell when John Carlson was out for a long period of time. But I have them as far as the meh contenders there. And that's a perfect way to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about our meh middle of the pack contenders as well, and threats to the Florida Panthers defending their Eastern Conference championship title. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel and take your first swing at and betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet and bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just get 20 bucks and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's 200. You can with betting everything from the money line to over under and who you think is going to get the first home run. All the app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 on bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Segment number 2 here on this Friday, July 7th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast on another Fairbanks Friday edition of the show. Today, we're talking about biggest threats to the Florida Panthers, and we already named one of them. Nick had the Washington Capitals as bottom of the barrel. We know that they're not going to rebuild under Alexander Ovechkin, but I had them as my meh category here. But another one I have is Pittsburgh. Let's talk about the rival of the Capitals there. Very risky to put Tristan Jarry, extend Tristan Jarry as Kyle Dubas is there in his first year. He said he's going to bet on the core 3 of the Penguins. And there was rumors about Mikael Granlund possibly getting his contract bought out too. That didn't happen for the Penguins. I like the signing of Ryan Graves for them, but of course there's still pretty bad contracts of Jeff Carter, Jeff Petrie, two guys that are names Jeff there. My name is Jeff. But all we need is Channing Tatum there from 21 Jump Street. But another team as well that I just don't know. I just don't know what I feel like. Lou Lamoriello is a little bit maybe out of touch now. In this stage of his career, I'm surprised Varlamov got a 4-year deal to back up Sorokin, who he got himself paid too. Pierre Engvall, great. That was a great trade that they had. Bottom six scoring there, but a 7-year deal there that has a 16-team no trade clause throughout the entirety of the contract. But I wanted Scott Mayfield, but not at 7 years. It's going to be 37 until his contract expires there. So those teams, Pittsburgh and New York, I'm not sure what to make of those teams.
So I don't know what to do with Pittsburgh either, because it seems like they were going to break it down about a year or two ago, and then Hextall comes in and gives everybody money, which then cost him his job. But now Kyle Dubas comes in and he signs in my opinion, an okay goalie. He has hot streaks here and there, but I don't think he's going to be the guy that's going to take the Penguins to the promised land. But you can never count out the Penguins with Sidney Crosby or Genvi Malkin, or Chris Letang. Even though I'm not a big fan of his game, but you can't count them out. But I would say that they're in the mech category. New York Islanders are going to be perpetually in this. I don't think they're ever going to scare anybody. They're a boring team, and I'm sorry to say that if there's Islanders fans listening to this, but their style of play is stuck in the middle 90s, and they give ridiculous contracts to people who, whatever. I mean, if Lou Lamoriello is trying to give me a 7-year deal, and I was going to be making as much money as maybe Engvall was, and I'm a bottom 6 guy, I'll take that. That's fine. I got security. I mean, he's been doing this since his Toronto days, and he even did it with the New Jersey Devils when Kovalchuk
The
came
15-year
in.
deal.
Yeah, like what? Tell me a 15-year deal that's ever worked out in any sports. I think Bobby Bonilla is still being paid. I'm pretty sure Kovalchuk is still getting paid.
Priaccio is getting
Yeah,
paid.
like I think, as you're saying, that maybe the NHL has a problem with the length of contracts, but Lou Lamoriello is the problem.
Yeah.
So I don't really see him actually being with the organization after this season because I don't think they're going to make the playoffs.
Mm.
But I will say this: another meh team for me. It's honestly gonna be the Washington, or not Washington. Wow, it's gonna be the Ottawa Senators.
hmm
They're gonna lose to Brinkett. They're thinking about trying to bring in Tarasenko, but I don't see how they've improved. Since last season. Yeah, they started gelling a little bit better, but I don't see it. You know, I They don't have the goaltending still. Their defense is still kind of, Swiss cheese. They have Brady to Chuck there, which, I'll never count him out. But still, there's not enough there for me to see that they're going to be, even close to even being a threat at any point in the next year or two.
Yeah, I was gonna name those next, but I was gonna group Ottawa with other Atlantic Division teams because these are the three. These are the three that are linked together as far as rebuilds and all. Detroit, Ottawa, and Buffalo.
Yeah.
Here, which Detroit is in on the DeBrincat sweepstakes as
Yep.
well. They got Stanley Cup experience with JT Compher as well. When you miss out on a first round pick, sometimes that could set you back years. And Philip Zadina is on unconditional waivers for contract termination as well. Was up and down the lineup and really couldn't produce, kind of like Jesse Puljujärvi with the Edmonton Oilers as
Yep.
well. And they got Shane Gostisbehere at $4 million. No way Florida was going to pay that for Ghost
No.
there. And James Reimer, 35 years old, back up Ville Husso. I think, man, Ville Husso is probably going to get a big lion's share of the games, like probably 65 plus, if I'm going to assume. So I still a very young team, but of course, Steve Yzerman doesn't guarantee any timelines as far as getting to a certain point. And Chris Draper, I just found out a few days ago that he's going to be assistant GM to Steve Yzerman. Ottawa, Jonas Korpisalo. I looked up how many games he's played. The most games he's played in his NHL career. He has never played more than 37 in his NHL career. But can we see bubble Jonas Korpisalo again? Can we? It's possible that we could. But their power play is great, but that's about it. Health is still a factor. Josh Norris missed a good part of the season. Jacob Chikrin as well, who they traded for as well. But it's just really is Jonas Korpisalo going to be worth the 5-year deal there? And Buffalo, I think I'm the highest of those three. I think I'm the highest on them. Though their blue line is still very young. They brought a majority of their guys back. And I guess that's still the patient approach that that Don Granato and Kevin Adams are trying to do there. Eric Johnson, though he's a little older, former number 1 overall pick there, is there to mentor their blue line and maybe crunch up some minutes so Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power don't get so many. But I have a soft spot. I think I have a little bit of a soft spot for the Sabres, because I would love to see the hometown boy Patrick Kane, when healthy, go there as well. Once he is healthy, and maybe are they in the market for John Gibson, who has requested a trade out of Anaheim, even though John Gibson's agent has tried to call Frank Zaravelli's report false, there as well. And you also named Boston earlier. They're in cap hell. Had to trade Taylor Hall for nothing. Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci's bonuses are going to be on their cap this year. Do you trust Charlie Coyle to be the 1C? That's not the one that scares me. Morgan Geeky's a decent signing as well, but they got James Van Riemsdyk and when he didn't get anything as far as a return when Chuck Fletcher was in Philadelphia as well. Kevin Shattenkirk, 34 years old. They're an old team, and part of me feels that the Florida Panthers broke them. Wouldn't you say?
I will say I think Florida broke all three of the teams that they faced in the Eastern Conference. To be honest
Fair.
with you, judging by not only their signings or their lack of being able to sign anything. I mean, if you look at Boston, that's the end for them there. They're in cap hell, as you said, and they're signing people who may or may not do anything for them. I like JVR, but I don't think he's ever been a superstar. And you just keep adding on age instead of trying to, I guess, trade away some of the older things that you have to get young again. But, you're in the Northeast and you have to win. They had the best season ever last season. I really doubt that they replicate that. And after losing 7 games in the fashion that they did, they had to kind of run it back a little bit. Then you look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, they got rid of the better players that probably could have got them over the hump if they would have stayed the season. And they brought in bigger, older guys that I'm still not scared of. I mean, just to be honest with you, the fact that they didn't trade one of the core 4, I think, was the issue. They needed to free up some cap space and also bring in some other voices. They didn't get rid of the cancer in the in the in the locker room. And then Carolina for sure is the one that was broken because this is the 3rd time they've been swept in the Eastern Conference Finals since 2009. Look who they went to sign. Look at the names that they're attached to. They're looking for scorers. They're looking for defensemen who can put the puck in the back of the net. So that's why Erik Karlsson's there. That's why they want to get Tarasenko in there. They need guys that are going to put the pucks in the back of the net. And that's unfortunately that's all because of what Florida did to them. But back to your point here, as far as like the net teams and everything. I think your list is spot on. I really don't have any other arguments or anything else to put in there except for just, these teams are getting older and they're going to have to figure things out. And as far as Buffalo goes, I think they're the best of the bunch. I think Detroit's almost there. They just need to figure things out. And if anything, I think the Zadina thing is a blessing in disguise for them because he's acting like Jonathan Drouin. And we know how Stevie Yzerman handled that situation. And the kid's done nothing to deserve that contract that he got. And the way he's acting right now shows that he's not being professional.
Yeah, and you're surrounding $4 million as far as what's left on the deal, at least from what I saw today. I'm like, oh,
yeah, he'll be lucky to get league minimum right now.
And one of the people and the pick after that was Quinn Hughes. You what I said earlier, you set yourself back when you miss on picks. That is one of them. But of course,
Kenny Holland.
Yep. and now I think he's going into his last year now with Edmonton, and then he's going to call it quits from what I heard last time. But we're focusing on Eastern Conference here. So my 7 Met teams: Washington, Pittsburgh, New York Islanders, Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, and Boston. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3. We're going to talk about the 5 biggest threats to the Florida Panthers defending their Eastern Conference final title. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Segment number 3 here on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast on Friday, July 7th, 2023. Nick Fairbanks is here for today's edition of the show. It's funny, the way you were talking about Toronto, and lost Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen to Nashville. And you talked about them not trading one of the core four, which contract talks for William Nylander, he wants 10. They want to give him 8, according to reports. But of course, great story of Max Domi signing with the Toronto Maple Leafs after his father Ty played for them, and I think that Tyler Bertuzzi, that I'm actually like clenching my fist a little bit. It's like, damn it, and he's gonna up his value even if he's not in Toronto long term. But it sounded like you wanted to put the Toronto Maple Leafs in the mech category instead of the biggest threats, because I have them in the biggest threats. I think they're the talent of Marner and Matthews still carries them to at least a big threat, even though their goaltending is still questionable with Samsonov. We don't know what's going to happen with Matt Murray's contract. They still got to figure that out, because Joseph Wall, the little bits that we saw from him, I was fairly impressed by him, but I think he's gonna eventually ease into that role. So it sounded like you didn't see them as one of the biggest threats. Do you disagree?
No, I do see them as a threat during the regular season. I just don't think they're going to do any damage again in the playoffs. I mean, I personally think they got lucky to get out of the first round. Tampa outplayed them, but the fact is, you're losing a pedigree that you have in Ryan O'Reilly, and the fact he wanted to leave tells you something. Secondly, you lose Noel Chari, probably your best penalty killer, and he actually played some big minutes against Tampa and also against Florida. And then you bring in a guy like Luke Shen, who I think I've never seen him play like that before. I think that's the best I've ever seen him play, and they couldn't get a contract done with him. So I think that those 3 players alone will actually have them take a step back, and they will not do what they think they're going to do. Plus, they're trying to push at their Stanley Cup favorites. I don't see it at all. The fact that Matthews doesn't step up in the playoffs, Marner, I'm not even going to say it. Just he is what he is. And then Nylander, who probably was the best out of the core 4, to be honest, deserves to get paid. And he's going to do exactly what Marner did. He's going to wait until he gets that contract, or they trade him. So either way, they're going to be a threat during the season, but not during the playoffs.
Yeah, and if you sign Nylander, you're gonna have $10 million in 4 players and 4 forwards too. That's the tough part about what Brad Treliving has now on his plate. I'm gonna go quickly through Tampa. This was a very short explanation. Yeah, they lost Yanni Gord, Barclay Goodrow, Alex Killorn, and Andre Palat. But you got to believe it. It's a believe it till I see it. Even though the salary cap is starting to catch up to them. Who knows if last year was a one-off? But I'm also not one to write them off very easily. I'm going to move on to the New York Rangers as the next one. Best goalie in the world still. After that, yeah, Mika Zibanejad did it, and Artemi Panarin didn't show up in the postseason. Which, by the way, Mika Zibanejad was DJing at Lollapalooza in Sweden. I don't know if you saw that, Nick, which is really, really cool there. But of course, there's still questions about their young guys of Lafreniere. He's being shopped around apparently. Capo Caco still, and the way that they went for it last year, could they take that similar step back that the Florida Panthers did after winning the President's Trophy in 2022? That's what's the scary part. But Blake Wheeler, he can score 15 goals and year in and year out, and he's in his mid-30s, and he has that leadership. Even though he's not going to wear the C on his chest as well. So I think that's a big threat. And the 2 biggest threats that I have are actually, very luckily, 2 teams that are not in that Atlantic division. So, and those are the New Jersey Devils and the Carolina Hurricanes. The New Jersey Devils trained for Tyler Toffoli, and this is the thing about what Tom Fitzgerald is doing. There's only one player who makes $9 million, and that's Dougie Hamilton. Everyone else is $8 million and below. They brought back Timo Meyer, like I said, brought back Tyler Toffoli. Luke Hughes is going to be part of the mix for the first full season. Brought back Eric Holla, who's annoying in the bottom 6 as well. Nico Hischier signed for a few more years. Jesper Bratt has been great ever since being drafted. And of course, Carolina the big defenseman of free agent signing in Dmitry Orlov. The cap hits high, but it's a short-term deal, so it's not that big of a deal. Reportedly in on Tarasenko. We mentioned in the first segment that they could be bringing it back Tony DeAngelo, and it could be official as soon as July 9th as well. And even brought back their goalie tandem at
Yeah.
very cheap as well. And Jordan Stahl, their captain. So they're sacrificing. I call it the Dwayne Wade approach. Coming back for less money because there's one thing in mind: to win.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Carolina has been swept 3 times since '09, but you see them continuously knocking on door. They could be in, who knows? They could be secretly on the brink. I haven't heard anything. There hasn't been any national reporting, and there still needs to be that goal scoring there for Carolina. But as far as those 3 teams, those 3 metropolitan teams, um, what says you about them as far as them being a threat to the Florida Panthers?
I think Carolina, even though they didn't get swept, I'm quoting Rod Brindamore on that one, even though they lost the series 4-0. Um, I think they are a threat just by all the moves that they've made, and that that they want to run it back and bring everybody back, which I think will make the team closer and it'll make them realize exactly what they need to do in order to get over the hump and actually make the Stanley Cup final. So definitely agree with them. The New York Rangers, they're a weird team for me. I could see them totally dominating, or I can see them fall flat on their face, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I know they have Laviolette there, and usually Laviolette, within the first 2 seasons of being with the team, he makes the Stanley Cup final. So would not be surprised if they do that. I think their misses with Capo Caco and Lafreniere are going to haunt them, because how do you miss on 2 straight, one first overall and then a second overall? How do you miss on those?
Mm-hmm.
And then who was the third team that you had?
New Jersey.
So this is the one team I am not buying. I am actually selling right now. I think that they hit their peak last year. I like the signings, and I like that they have everybody under contract for 9 million or less. Which is, hey, Toronto, you should have took notes on this, or Kyle Dubois, Dubas, you should have taken notes on this. But I don't know. I feel like they overachieved last year, kind of like what Florida did their previous season when they won uh, the President's Trophy. I'm not a big fan of their defense, and I'm not a big fan of their goaltending.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we'll see what happens. I think that they were lucky to get around New York. I think New York had a lot of internal things that were going on, but they're going to figure that out. And they were manhandled by a Canes team by just playing fast and loose. So um, they're a meh for me, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Carolina was able to slow down their pace. And especially when it comes to breaking up passes in the neutral zone, and
Hmm.
when it comes to generating speed, Carolina is just great at at eliminating that for their opposition. So before we sign off here, we listed all the teams that could possibly be threats, and of course, with New Jersey, their goaltending got a little bit of experience, especially Akira Schmid, who spent a good amount of time in the AHL with Utica last year. But of course, we as Florida Panther fans, we saw Vitek Vanacek
Hmm.
in 2022, and we saw how quickly Peter Laviolette pulled him in favor of Samsonov in the Washington series as early as game 2. But as far as Florida, as far as with these teams, and of course, a lot of turnover has happened. For me, as far as threats in the Eastern Conference, I see them as the lower tier threats, but not as far as the meh. But and the main reason for me is really the injuries as of right now for me. And still, we don't know if we're going to see the same Bobrovsky that we saw come into the Stanley Cup playoffs as well. How does he personally
Hmm.
how does he go about his off season as well? And how does he start 2022 23 324 as well? So I put him in the bottom tier of threats. I don't think they're the favorite going into next year.
No.
But what says you about where they stand as far as threats?
I think, yeah, as you said, they're between threats and meh right now, and it does come down to how healthy they're going to be and when they can get healthy. This is why Bill Zito signed everybody that he did. I mean, I think Evan Rodriguez was a huge pickup. very under the radar, is not somebody I was even looking at. But the fact is that he can play up and down the whole lineup. He's a good defensive forward and he can score some goals. So I think that's awesome. But then to bring the glutton of defensemen in and probably going to have a rotation there just to see who fits and who works, I think it's smart. And that way, you know, when we do get healthy, that they know who their pairings are going to be going forward. But it's going to be really interesting to see what the top two lines are going to be like. Is Barkov going to be playing with Verhaeghe still? Now that Duclair's not here anymore, who's going to be playing on that wing? Is Tkachuk and Bennett still going to be together? Who's going to play on their wing? Is it going to be Nick Cousins, or are they going to move Rodriguez up? So to me, if Florida's going to stay afloat, it's going to be on their top two lines, and if their defense can actually keep it together. And as far as Bobrovsky goes, I have a feeling we're going to see the better version of Bobrovsky. He finally got a taste of, you know, Stanley Cup playoffs. He got further than the second round, and he was one, if not the second most important person on this Panthers roster to get them where they are. And, you know, I don't think that feeling ever leaves you. So
No.
I expect him to at least have one more season with either him being in Florida or having the type of play that he had last season. And, you know, I'm hopeful for that, because it would be awesome to see him excel after so many years of trying to figure things out.
Yeah, especially we hammer. We've been hammering ever
Oh
since we've
yeah.
been podcasting together about how much he trains too. And when something goes wrong in his career, how much he bounces back and it's like, wow, Vesna
Yep.
Bob all over again. And maybe this will be yet another example of that as well. So who knows? And you made a great point. We should not be surprised if we actually do when it comes to that. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where we discuss all the threats and non-threats for the Panthers in the Eastern Conference and where the Panthers stand here. But tell everybody where they can follow you online.
So you guys can all obviously follow me on Twitter at Prudential0. I'm still trying to figure out this Threads thing, but if you guys want, you guys can follow me at Bure 1096, and I will give you a follow back. So Armando, thank you again for having me back this week.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, my friend. I'll see you next week, my friend.
See you next week.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Ronan, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Every day, make sure you come back early next week. We'll be discussing the way too early power play and PK units for the Florida Panthers. What could they look like come game one of the regular season? So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.